Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we've just come back from seeing Tar. The name of the main character is Lydia Tar. And as we're told with this long introduction where she's being interviewed by, Adam Gopnik from The New Yorker on stage, she is a world-class conductor. She's an ethnomusicologist. She's done this, that and the other. She's won an EGOT. We're given this long list of her achievements, which it is subtly revealed has been compiled by her assistant because we see her mouthing along to it, which is quite a nice little thing. She apparently, although details are kept from the audience to a great degree, has a history of sexual impropriety, possibly, with students of hers or members of her orchestras. And during the course of this 2.5-hour film, two and a bit more than that, we see her life, we see her work, and we see her downfall as these and other things emerge. I found it ultimately really dissatisfying.
Me too. It was so long.
Well, I did see you checking your watch 3 times. I don't want to be completely down on the whole thing because for a long time I'm sitting here going, I can't believe how absorbed I am in this woman's life. Cate Blanchett plays Lydia Tar. She's incredible in it, I think.
She is.
Like I say, it starts essentially with this long interview. What's his name? Adam Gopnik is playing himself, and he does quite well. Which is nice. And I'm going, this is just a poncy, smart interview with an intellectual conductor about music, about her history. So I'm totally absorbed by this.
Yeah,
it's sort of not a film, but I'm totally absorbed.
Yeah, well, actually, that's the thing, because I thought, I love it. It's such a fascinating conversation, and it kind of really makes you understand what a conductor does, and the thoughts that go through her mind, and choices, and, the whole discussion about time, which is so interesting, which then there's a discussion on movement, right? So it's kind of movement through time and, those ways of talking about music. I thought it was fascinating. But I think we're 20 minutes into the film. What's going on? What's the story? Where's the conflict? Where's the drama? Right?
Yeah. It's the character. It's all about the character.
It's all about the character. And I thought at the end that this is a film that's so absorbed by the lead actor, the performance and the lead actor, that it throws the story out the window. I mean, as storytelling, I think it's crap. I think, you're wondering what's going on in the film, what's the conflict, things kind of slowly unfurl. And at the end, as you say, you get this downfall, which I think is not very satisfactorily depicted anyway.
I'm not sure it's hugely believable either.
Well,
in elements, it's not. The video that is circulating on social media, which we see has been heavily edited, I don't believe for a second. The idea that someone would film so we see this long take very early on of her teaching in Juilliard, and she's talking to this student who objects to Mozart, I think, on Bach, on the basis that he sired 20 children and was kind of a bad person, and I can only listen to people of colour and that sort of thing. And she, to a certain degree aggressively, kind of claps back at him. And then we see this come back later on as a student has filmed this and edited it to make her look much, much worse than she was. That's the bit I don't believe. People do film in classes and things like that all the time, and they go up online, but you don't see them edited like that. You see not the whole thing. You see from where they started to where they finished shooting.
Well, listen, I could believe that it was edited like that, but I just couldn't believe that was the end of it. That would be the last of the response. And actually, I thought the film was very unclear about the sexual liaisons.
Yeah.
That you could see that she was obsessed with some people and other people were obsessed with her, right? And, that she clearly had affairs outside of her marriage. And you think, well, okay, one thing is who cares, right? Like people do, right? But the accusation of sexual harassment, of driving someone to suicide, I actually, thought we needed more information to make a judgment on that.
Yeah.
Kind of how guilty was she of that? Was she guilty at all? Was it, because she stopped talking to this girl, right? And she knew that her assistant hadn't erased the messages and yet did nothing about it, right? And then her assistant is getting vengeance on her for not being given a job. I mean...
It's a film that's very happy to leave things hanging and to assume that the ambiguity is satisfying or is the point. It's just not. I mean, when a film... Like I said, I didn't know anything about this film before I went into it. I knew the title and that it had Cate Blanchett and Mark Strong in it. Mark Strong's in it so little that later on when he comes back, I'm like, oh yeah, he was in this.
He's wonderful in it, though.
Oh yeah, he's on the poster, but it's like, it's not a Mark Strong film, you know.
No.
Well, is there such a thing as a Mark Strong film? I think there are films with Mark Strong in them.
Fair enough. But he's even in those films more than he's in this. Anyway, I knew nothing. And so, as you said, I start off going, what is this? And then after coming out of the film, I look it up and I see the first line is psychological drama, psychological thriller or psychological drama on like the Wikipedia page, and that's how people are describing it. And I guess that's kind of true, but psychological dramas and psychological thrillers have more drive than this, and their plots are complete. Like the symbol that you see every now and again, which she recognises and is terrified by or repulsed by. I want that. I guess I kind of get what's going on there, but I would like some explanation. Her score for Mahler's Fifth, which is what she's recording, what's supposed to record, and which is what Mark Strong's after, goes missing. Okay, the question is, where? It's not explained. Was it the assistant? Has she been fired by then? Was it the wife who has started to take against her because she's obsessed with this new student?
Well, I think whodunit is not of any interest to this filmmaker.
Yeah. Neither
is narrative tension. Neither, frankly, is storytelling. Or if it is, he's doing a really crummy job of it. I think it's all about the character and about her interiority, because actually, you also know very little of her outside of, her being an orchestra conductor, and a lesbian in a particular current relationship, right? Because actually, at the end, when she goes back to the family home and you have her brother talk to her and you think, well, she invented herself or whatever. Well, it would have been interesting to have that earlier on, or, at least some hint of that. Yeah. So I just think it's very, very poor storytelling, frankly. I think it's very poor filmmaking as well,
It's a film that has not replaced its lack of interest in telling a coherent or complete story with an interest in making it atmospheric. Or, what I mean? It is lacking in all sorts of ways. And it is... The reason to keep watching is Cate Blanchett, I think.
Who is mesmerizing, as soon as she begins to conduct, or actually just speak, or even explain something. I mean, and kind of maneuver herself in about 4 or 5 languages, because she speaks in Italian, in English, in French, in German, right? Like, I thought that was kind of, and making things understandable. I mean, whatever clarity you have from the film comes from her, and not the filmmaking. I think it's a really self-indulgent film. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes long, in which for long stretches of time, nothing happens except Cate Blanchett.
Yeah.
Which is not nothing. I'm not minimizing that. But the story's so badly told. So when she begins to be sexually interested in the cellist, right, which is, I think, as much about being sexually attracted by her talent as anything else, right? There's so many potential ways of telling that story, of creating tension, of kind of illuminating a complex situation. So, for example, shouldn't it be of interest whether this girl is a lesbian or not and can reciprocate, right? Kind of nothing. You're shown that happening at the end as like this disappointment or betrayal or, and of course with the suggestion that the girl has been playing up to it because, she keeps going out a secret. But, I just find it's kind of unbelievable that so much would happen before you even find out whether there's the slightest suspicion of a reciprocation of interest. Yeah, I mean, that's not even how human relations work, right? I mean, before you take someone to New York for a sexual liaison, you must have had some clues that, the person is interested. Yeah, I mean, you could be confused, you could be misreading the cues, yeah, could be a mistake. But there's nothing of that in the film beforehand, like nothing, right?
Do you think the film is regressive or retrograde in some
I
of
do.
its attitudes? See, I wonder, I am questioning myself about this. I wonder whether it is regressive or whether it is about regressiveness or regression. So the scene I'm thinking about is the Juilliard scene, where she's talking to this student who's a person of colour, and he's the guy who's objecting to Bach on kind of identity grounds, and yeah, we've heard enough from white cis het composers. Shouldn't we broaden it out to this, that, and the other? And she kind of dissects that and kind of takes him apart, and he ends up storming out and calling her a fucking bitch.
I know.
This long thing. And so this guy is basically made out to be like the most fragile, thoughtless sort of kid. Is the film? I can't tell if the film is really saying this, that like these people are brittle, and that's what they're like, or if it is about, or like parodizing that.
No. I think the film is. I think the film wants you on her side at that point.
Yeah.
Sympathetic to kind of honesty and openness and rigor, and that kind of there is something about this young person who is limiting himself by narrowing choices, by not wanting to know. So one of the greatest composers of all time on the basis of whatever he's been told about him. But I think the film is very reactionary in that it offers no grounds, for why the position that this young man is maybe misjudging, right, is not also kind of necessarily an important one to take on, right? So I think the film thinks that any of those discussions are infantile and dangerous. The people involved in talking about it, the woke people, are infantile, and actually the people who don't maneuver those ideas with tact and dishonesty open themselves up to their downfall, which is what happens in this film.
And not only are the woke people, weak and all that, but they're so craven that they will edit a video the way they do to make it look like she said things that she didn't.
That's right.
Which, as I say, I think if you're asking the audience to believe that, that's a step too far. I just don't.
Yeah, but the instantaneousness of the demonstrations against her and so on, I've seen that happen. That does happen. I mean, things in social media do take on kind of...
Yeah, they do. Once they start picking up, they go
a
viral.
different force. But I think the film... Well, I think it's either regressive or certainly it doesn't handle those scenes with much complexity or understanding, in my view. So I didn't understand the end. So were people in cosplay? Was she reduced to playing?
Well, I know I understood that. Like that's about her downfall. So she's had the highest height. She's had EGOT. She's had the New Yorker. She's done the big 5 orchestras, I think. She's in Berlin, which is where she was wanting to be. All of this, and now she's lost all that, and she's in
China. Well, it looked like China to me.
East Asia somewhere.
Because earlier in the film they say that she's huge in China.
Right.
So I expected it to be China, where she was huge.
I mean, I can't tell you that I recognise exactly what country it was, but it's in East Asia somewhere, and she's playing at a cosplay convention, and the only reason that I know the music that she's playing, conducting, is from a video game called Monster Hunter.
Right.
Is not because I play it, but because I saw it on the credits.
Right.
And so I knew. So I think at some point someone's going to be playing Monster Hunter or something. Turns out that it's this music at the end, and she's playing to a cosplay convention. And I mean, I think the film is so snobby because it's just looking down on all that. Like, I'm not a cosplay person. I'm not really a convention person. I've been to one, and I didn't have a great time. But like, these people are having shitloads of fun, enjoying really powerful music. That's it's not Bach, it's not Beethoven, it's not all the other members of the canon that this film, wants you to value. but it is really powerful. And the film is saying, no, this is the worst. Look where she's fallen. And I'm not saying that like it's the same status as conducting the Berlin Philharmonic. I'm not. It's clear, but it's either about the tragedy of where she's fallen, or it's about the comedy of where she's fallen. But either way, it's an insult, really.
Well, and also you don't have much tragedy and you don't have much comedy in this film. I think to me, what symbolizes the film and the problems with the film is the credits. I told you at the beginning of the film, it really annoyed me to see the credits at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, so we should explain the opening of the film has all of the credits, I think minus the actors, all of the credits. They come up at the start. So instead of just leaving at the end, you sit through them all and there's a bit of music playing.
And all in really small lettering. So you have like second boom operator and that kind of credit, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is all about the filmmakers. And I think good, in some ways, good on you. If you want to be grateful to your cast and your crew and your thousands of producers, I understand that as a filmmaker, you get the film made because those hundreds of thousands of, or hundreds or thousands of people contributed to it. Yes? But this is not about you. This is about the audience. Yeah. I think, the opening credits are about the audience. They're not about the filmmakers, right? And I thought it was like so disdainful to make the audience sit through I don't know how many titles of really small lettering with 50 people on each title.
To be fair, if they were bigger lettering, think how much longer it would take.
Well, but it's besides the point. The audience doesn't need to know that.
Yeah, well...
at the beginning of the film. So I thought that was sheer arrogant self-indulgence.
Because you said, no film does this. And I said, they used to do it in the 30s and 40s. And of course they didn't, really.
No, of course they didn't. They had like 5 people.
Well, they had
about 5 cards,
Yeah, 5 cards. They had lots of people on those cards. And they had more jobs. Like, when you get opening credits these days, they tend to just be actors, director, writer, maybe. You don't get very much. Well, in the old days, you did get more at the start.
But not much more. You'd have the costume designer. You'd have the hairdresser in a separate card.
Yeah.
And you'd have the editor and the producers, and the main sound people, right? Yeah. But it would literally be 5 or 6 cards that would have all of that information.
But it's also the case that things like Best Boy, Gaffer, Second AD, you didn't get those at all. The films ended with the end. Then I said... he's also been watching Gaspar Noé films, because Gaspar Noé has done this at least 2 times. He did it in Irreversible, and he did it in Enter the Void, and I'm not sure, can't remember.
Well, in Irreversible, it made sense why it started that way. Right, the film was told backwards.
But the thing is, he made it entertaining. So
that too.
Irreversible, they scroll up or scroll down, whichever one was backwards, and then it all tilts and goes wonky. And in Enter the Void, the opening credits to that are a fucking animated masterpiece. It's ridiculous. Here, it is not trying to entertain. It's just you're sitting through it.
I thought it was a real metaphor for all that's wrong with the film. But what's right about the film is really Cate Blanchett, who I think is truly wondrous in this. Every time you think, she can't get any better, you recognize her or whatever, and then she does something like this, which is just... kind of so exciting to watch, really. And I'm not just talking about her grand moments of leading the orchestra and so on. I mean, I think even just like explaining Bach, you feel it's riveting, right? Like, I felt like I was learning even from that. So I like that very much. And actually, I think it's also worth mentioning, though maybe I'm wrong about this, but it does seem to me to be one of the few mainstream films which has a lesbian and a lesbian relationship at its center. And of course, Blanchett is already famous for Carol, in which the lesbianism is no problem at all. Like, it's not about being a lesbian, right? I mean, she happens to be one, right? But it is about her relationship, her place in the orchestra, her relationships with the world, her calculatedness, her career building, her obsessions, her selfishness, her love of music, right? The film is about kind of many things. And she happens to be a lesbian, right? And that does affect the narrative in the sense that, her relationship is with a woman and so on. Yeah. But actually, being a lesbian is not the drama, right?
The film is not about being lesbian, but do you think it plays differently if she's straight and if the people who she's obsessing over and possibly having these sexual liaisons with are young men.
It's important that she's a lesbian because, had it been, well, frankly, I think, in spite of Me Too, it would have been difficult to make a film in which it was a male as a conductor and young women, in the orchestra, in which it would have been much of a problem. Likewise, if it was an older woman involved with younger men in the orchestra, I don't think you would have had a drama there. They're all above the age of consent. It's not as if she's like, So actually, the only problem is that it is young women. And her. I mean, I do think if it had been a male conductor with these young women, I think it wouldn't have been a problem at all. I mean, there would have been no film. There would have been no drama.
Really?
I think so.
The story of an older man in a position of power taking advantage of young women.
Well, taking advantage is,
Yeah, sure, that's low.
I mean, it's already very questionable that whether Cate Blanchett is taking advantage.
Yeah, absolutely, because the film's explaining bugger all.
So, I think the people are all, in an orchestra like that, they're all tops in their field. They all have power. They're all adults, right? I mean, if a guy is making passes at someone who's 20 years younger, I don't see a drama, to be honest.
Wow, that surprises me. I think it's quite obvious there would be one.
Well, for me it isn't. And maybe it's a generational thing. I think it's very different than a Harvey Weinstein situation where, he was forcing people, and kind of lying and jumping on them and whatever. You don't see any of that in this film.
No.
So, all there is like sexual interest and maybe like sexual obsession. But actually maybe from their end, and it would, I mean...
That's also why I think generally this kind of sexual storyline in this is just not that interesting. Yeah. I think it needs to be stronger. I think I would like, maybe it just sounds like I'm a fucking idiot, but I would just like things to be explained more. I'd like things to be more concrete. I'd like the film to have a bit more courage to and not kind of rely on ambiguity.
It's not ambiguity. It's a lack of clarity or
but I think it's deliberate.
To me, ambiguity is when the meaning is so rich that you can't quite decide on which one.
Okay, well, what I mean by ambiguity is it is leaving things unclear.
It's muddled, is what I think this film does. It's muddled. It's not ambiguous. It's just bloody muddled.
I think it's doing that thing. It's what does David Baldock call it? Strategic ambiguity, where you don't want the audience on either side. You want them to be able to make up their own minds. You don't want to turn people off, or whatever it might be. There's an element of that here.
Well, but you've got to give people more information than this film gives you.
Yeah.
To create.
Well, strategic ambiguity, as David Baldock describes it, he's not complimentary about it. Like, he's talking about it as a kind of a get-out clause for filmmakers. They say, we're just presenting this, we hold our hands up, we don't have a point of view. I want my filmmaker to have a point of view,
And just to get back to your point, I feel, that this question of sexual intrigue, of politics, of an orchestra, if the character hadn't been a lesbian, I really think there wouldn't have been any drama. And not just because of the way that the different sexual liaisons are perceived in relation to gender and sexuality, but because of the fighting of all the political battles within an institution are also inflected with gender.
Yeah.
So...
I would like it to be smarter about music, in a way. I think you're right when you talk about, particularly that opening scene or early scene where she's being interviewed by Mr. Gopnik, that some of the things she says are fascinating about conducting and that sort of thing. But I feel like I want to understand the music better a lot of the time. And I'm not a dummy about music, and I think the film does a certain amount of it. I like the moment where I do quite like when she's rehearsing with the orchestra, she's switching back and forth between German and English, and when she switches into German, you won't get subtitles for it, but it's a gist that you're getting. That's what's important. And she's saying something in German. She's trying to explain to them how to play a certain note. And then Nina Hoss, who is her partner, and also is she first
violinist?
Violin. she stands up and demonstrates to the rest of the orchestra, here's how to play it. And I get it, I get it. I think the film's quite smart about that.
Yes.
But there are points where...
I think it's smart about music. I mean, and I thought it helped me, I'm very ignorant about music. It really helped me understand.
Yeah.
Yes, I kind of finally understood what a conductor does.
There's a bit in Steve Jobs, the film Steve Jobs, the Danny Boyle film, where he talks about speaking to an orchestra conductor. He said, "What do you do? I don't understand what you do." And he goes, "I play the orchestra." You go, what a great line. That's what she does. She plays the orchestra.
But it's more than that, because, she plays the orchestra because she studied, understood the score, and come up with an understanding of its intentions and its effects due to, a super intelligent interpretation.
Yeah. Still, there's something I feel is missing. Maybe it comes down to that feeling that I have that the film is all about the canon, like I say. It's all about Beethoven and Bach and Mozart and Mahler, particularly in this case. And I don't think I get the impression, I could be wrong, I could have missed something, that the Lydia character listens to anything else. We're told that she does. And that she commissions scores from young people. Does she?
Yeah, there's that conversation, I think maybe with Mark Strong.
Right.
Yeah. Or maybe at the beginning when you've been given her CV, that's one of the things that she does.
Yeah, and I suppose she does her ethnomusicology. Not that you see any evidence of that. It is something that is on just a CV that's being read out. And the impression that you get, at least I get, I should say, from watching her behaviour throughout the 2.5 hours plus, is she's all about the canon, and anything that young student has to say is very easy to dismiss. Although it must be said, she doesn't dismiss him from the room; he dismisses himself. But that's the film doing that. Yeah, that's the film making him do that.
Yeah, and actually, that is part of what makes the film, I think, regressive.
Yeah.
Because she's very patient with him. She tries to show him. She plays for him. Yeah, and so
and he poo-poos it all.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean. That's the film's attitude towards young people, essentially. Not young people, but the woke lefty mob.
It doesn't treat young people well. Actually, I hadn't thought of it until you mentioned it. But if you think about it, kind of all of the young people in the film are actually sexually obsessive, suicides, that threaten your life, manipulative assistants who are obsessed with you and won't let you see anybody else and try to control your life through your schedule. So they're organizing your schedule, and then lastly, a young woman who's willing to use your interest in her, to climb up the ladder, but really kind of with a sexual agenda of her own that's directed elsewhere. So
I do believe that. I mean, of all the things that I can definitely believe, like people at the highest level, being cutthroat to get ahead. I fucking believe that completely.
Yeah.
It's just that I know the film kind of lacks all the kind of energy or intrigue that,
or even excitement,
right?
Because actually,
Whiplash did it all better.
That in itself is often so exciting to watch, like in Wall Street or something, where people are cruel and vicious, and but that has its own kind of energy and appeal, and kind of not that you'd necessarily want to be like that, but actually there's something in observing that when it's kind of played with a kind of energy, that can be exciting to watch. This was not exciting to watch.
Yeah, at the start when the title cards, the BBFC ratings card that is comes up, it said it's 15 rated. And it said sexual violence and sexual threat because it warns you before.
And you went, great.
I said, fantastic. I'm looking forward to this, whatever it is. And then, where was it? There was none. It was, they talked about it. You see a dream sequence where she kind of is sort of holding someone. I want much more than that.
But I must say, what it does have to fans of Cate Blanchett, that are many, it's almost like you get to see her every mood, right?
Yeah.
And, she stands with her hair falling backward and to the side, and you see her being beautiful in 105 different poses. Yeah, as well as being really good. Yeah, she is kind of, quite striking. I think the filmmaker's obsessed with her.
Yeah. And just seeing her face and everything that she does in that interview scene with Gopnik. There's one shot in particular, because the scene is cut between the two of them, but there's one shot in particular which lingers on her face for quite a long time. I forget what she's talking about during that shot, but you see all these just little movements of her face, looking backward and forward or changing expression. She's inhabiting that character. And the very, very long take, which is when she's teaching Juilliard and talking to that student, I mean, it's really long. It must be 8 or 9 minutes plus. It's and there's a huge amount of orchestration of the camera as well, choreography. Camera's always moving and finding a new shot, and she's moving around, and I think it's really good. And then there's a point quite late on in that take where she has like this, I forget what the phrase is, but there's a 3-word, like, complicated, dismissive phrase that she uses. I forget what it is, so it's not very satisfying. But when she said it, I was like, I can't believe you're this far into this take and didn't fuck that up. You know what I mean? There's something really impressive about just watching that.
Yes.
And what I really like about her the most, I think, the bits of her performance that I enjoy the most in this are when she is kind of performing to people. You know, she's performing to those students. She's commandeering that room. You know, and there's elements of that when she's rehearsing, although that's much more intimate. Certainly when she's on stage, there's performance in that.
Well, you see both her passion and enthusiasm and love for the music, and actually her ability to communicate that to either the students or the orchestra.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of very powerful. It's really beautiful to watch.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. She's an extremely competent, more than competent, she's an extremely talented communicator.
Yeah. All right. Well, my feeling is, if you're interested in lesbians in the cinema or in Cate Blanchett, go see this. Otherwise, it's a really, really long and muddled film. All right, well, thank you very much for listening. We're eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.